Hey everybody, it's Terry Battisti with the Bass Fishing Archives. Welcome back. Today what I have for you is a look at bass fishing literature, magazines in particular, and the genesis and evolution of how bass fishermen learned their trade through literature. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out primarily with, maybe the first books that were written, like James A. Henshaw in 1881, the Book of the Black Bass. We had in the 20s, we had Sheridan Jones. The 40s, we had Ray Bergman and Charles Fox. Then in the 40s, late 40s, early 50s, we had Jason Lucas, who changed everybody's ideas of how to fish bass, how to target bass, where to look for them, the whole 9 yards. But if you wanted a periodical, and he had read through the books, and sometimes those books were a bit confusing. If you wanted a periodical to read, you really had only the big three. So that would be Sports Afield, it was Field and Stream, and Outdoor Life. And because those magazines were not dedicated to bass fishing, they were dedicated to all hunting and fishing, you could go months without finding an article that was anywhere related to bass fishing. The spring issues all had bass fishing in them, but if you were looking for something in November or July or something like that, you were hard-pressed to find anything. Sports Afield was probably the best magazine, and that was all because of Jason Lucas being the fishing editor of that magazine. But other than that, I mean, there was nothing. And then in 1963, a department store clerk by the name of Bill Binkelman started a little newsletter called The Fishing News. And I have a collection of the original fishing news here in this binder. And they were essentially, a 2 to 4 page newsprint style, deal. And I mean, they were great. Binkelman, he enlisted the help of Buck Perry of Spoonplug fame. And pretty much on a weekly or monthly basis, they would put these fishing news things out with articles from, people like Al Lindner, for example, Ron Lindner, Buck Perry. They would draw topo maps and describe how to catch bass, but not only bass, walleye, pike, and muskie. So if you were a dedicated bass fisherman, especially a guy living in the South, who didn't care about muskie or pike or walleye, fishing news was a decent thing to get you by, but people were really craving a bass-centric magazine. And then, 1968, we have rayscott. And rayscott turned the entire industry on its nose. With his first 2 tournaments, he felt that he had enough support to start the Bass Anglers Sportsman Society in 1968. With BASS, he started Bassmaster Magazine. That's the first issue. And Bassmaster Magazine was, it was the epitome of what all anglers wanted, all bass anglers wanted with respect to magazines. And it started out, it was a quarterly magazine, so there was a spring, summer, fall, and winter issue. So that would be the spring of '68 issue, the first one. Here in my hands is the winter of 1970. At this point, bobcobb has come on as the editor of the magazine, and that is actually a picture of Cobb on the front of this issue. And then, as you go on through the years, in 1971 or 72, it changes from a quarterly magazine to a bi-monthly, so you're getting 6 issues a year. And then they would throw in a special issue in January, so you would actually getting 7 issues in those early years. And then by the time, so like here's the special issue for 1979. And that cover was a print that Bass sold through the magazine. And a buddy of mine had that print, and I had envy, and I still have envy. And obviously you can't get that print anymore. So anyway, it was the only bass-centric magazine at that time ever published. It was written by either pros in the early days in the 68, 69, and sometimes in the 70 until Cobb took over, when he started enlisting writers that would interview the top tournament anglers or a top local angler on techniques, tactics, and things that they were doing to catch fish. And that's what really cemented Bassmaster Magazine. Here's the latest issue here. Of course, you know, we lost Ray back a few weeks ago, the man that started the whole revolution and started the bass fishing industry. You know, sad time to lose him. So it's 1970, we have Bassmaster Magazine, and the copycats started coming, you know, out of the woodwork, so to speak. And I won't say they're copycats. I mean, these people that started these new organizations or these new magazines, they saw a need that they wanted to fill, and they went ahead and did it. And so the first magazine to come out after Bassmaster that I know of was a magazine that was put together by the Basscasters Angling Society. Yes, they got in trouble from that. They ended up becoming known as the Basscasters Association, BCA. And the magazine that they put out was The Lunkerhole. And on that cover that you see right there, there's Bobby Murray. I don't know who the guy is next to him, with a pretty dang big string of fish. And these magazines, the first 10 issues of The Lunkerhole, the cover was turquoise with some print on it, and it's a black and white old early magazine that's just, I mean, it's filled with text. There's hardly any ads in the thing, but it just really shows the sign of the times and, you know, what bass fishing was back in the day. The first 10 issues were done on that turquoise cover, and then as they got a little bit, let me pick this up here, as they started getting a little momentum and stuff, and they started getting more subscribers and more people that belong to BCA, they started coming out with some really cool covers. And so here's one here from January, February 75. That's a Bass Cat boat, buddy. That looks pretty cool. And on the back, there's a great Rebel ad. And then here's March, April of 75. And then one of the last issues, November, December 79. BCA ended up dissolving around 1980. And when they started out, they wanted to produce a tournament circuit for the local angler, the weekend angler, the guy that couldn't afford to go fish the BASS circuit. And they did really well. And then they kind of sold, and the people that bought them wanted to kind of challenge rayscott. And they started doing not just a local circuit in the Midwest, which would have been, you know, Kentucky, Missouri, Illinois, those states in that area. And they started doing national events and traveling all over the place. And, you know, I don't know if that's what killed them. They're competing with Ray, but if you look into the magazines and you look at the tournament reports, you see some big names. Doc Moorhead, Charles Moorhead was one. Basil Bacon, Guido Hibden. I mean, they all fished BCA back in the day before they made their big appearance on the Bassmaster tournament circuit. Okay, so next one on the chopping block here is Western Bass. And I'm including this mainly because A, that's the magazine that I grew up reading, and B, it's kind of chronological order that I'm going in right now. So Western Bass was started by the Western Outdoor News Organization, which was a newsprint that came out weekly in California and Arizona, and it essentially was, they would give weekly fish reports and some articles and stuff like that. But they started Western Bass to placate the Western angler, California, Arizona, Nevada, who wanted to fish tournaments. And they started the magazine, well, they started the newspaper in 73, and by 74 they had a magazine. And this is one of my copies for May of 1980. I've got some earlier ones, but that's fishing San Diego Lake in a low-line bass boat, probably with a 40-horse Mercury on it. Those were the days. The fun times. And then, so they started in 73. They went, full glossy in 74 time frame. And by the beginning of the 80s, they got bought by a couple of guys named Don Doty and Rich Schultz, and they were going to challenge bass. And they put up a pretty good effort. In 1981, they came up with the richest payout tournament ever in the history of bass fishing. First place was $50,000 cash. That is the U.S. Open that's still running today, that Rich Clunn calls the Iditarod of bass fishing tournaments. Greg Hines on the front cover there, he won that inaugural tournament, and that essentially changed the face of Western fishing and the feeling of Western anglers, that they actually had some, they were actually good anglers, then they could compete. Then in that 80, 81 time frame, they started to convert from Western bass. This is one of the weirdest covers of a bass fishing magazine I've ever seen, just red with Western bass on the front. But that was their segue from being Western bass to becoming what was known as U.S. bass. And if it wasn't for Rich Schultz's gambling problems and other problems that cost a lot of money, they may have given Ray a run for his money, because they were drawing all the top name pros in all the tournaments, and they expanded into Louisiana, they expanded into East Texas. They were fishing throughout the Midwest and Missouri, all the Missouri lakes, Table Rock, Lake of the Ozarks, you name it. Chickamauga, they had a $2 million tournament down there. In fact, Mike McClelland got his first break at that tournament and won quite a bit of money. And then Schultz put the money up his nose and on the crap table, and they went bankrupt. And Western Outdoor News ended up buying Western Bass / US Bass from Don Doty, and today it's called the Juan Bass Trail. It still exists, but I don't know that they have a magazine or anything like that anymore. All right, so that was 73, 74. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at American Bass Fisherman. American Bass Fisherman was a magazine that was started, and an organization that was started by a guy named George Oates. Now, George Oates fished the first Bassmaster Classic at Lake Mead. He was a regular on the Bassmaster Tour through about 72. And then he decided that he was going to start his own bass tournament organization and magazine in Florida. And the magazine started out, and the organization started out as Florida Bass Fisherman. Within a couple of months, it turned to American and Florida Bass Fisherman, and then a couple months later, it again changed and it went to just ABF, or American Bass Fisherman. And this issue here is the December-January issue of 1974. So that would be December of 73, January of 1974. It's a great cover. You've got a guy that it looks like he might be in a Ranger TR series boat, and it looks like he might be flipping. But there's no way that that's possible, right? Because D. Thomas did that in what, 74, 75 out west? Well, I beg to differ. That looks like that dude's flipping. Anyway, this is a beautiful magazine. I mean, this is one of the first issues. It's got great. I mean, here's a cool one for you. You've got Johnny Morris's Bass Pro Shop in the center part of the magazine, full page ads. And how many pages is this? It's 1, 2, it's 4 pages, and the first page of the ad is really awesome because you've got the new Bagley's Big B for $4, or for, excuse me, $2.95, and then you've got the Big O right next to it. You can't beat that. That's just great stuff. And advertising his 1974 catalog, which was the inaugural catalog after him sending out newsletters and stuff like that. But it's the magazine is just packed full of great old articles and awesome ads. The ads in some of these magazines that were not Bassmaster are actually better than the Bassmaster ads, and I have a feeling that that's due to the cost that Ray was charging for advertising in Bassmaster. Whereas you could get a full color ad. There's another great Bagley's ad. You could get a full color ad in ABF probably for a quarter of the cost that it would be for Ray's magazine. So anyway, here's the other thing I liked about this magazine is the way they would do their covers. So there's the spine of the book, but they printed the cover on a landscape. And I think that's pretty darn neat. I haven't seen anything other than ABF, and they've got 4 or 5 covers that are like that, printed that way. Pretty neat stuff. So that was September, October of 1975. And then here's the last issue that was printed in July, August 1978. And the funny thing is that in this magazine, from the editor's desk, there's no discussion about the magazine or the organization going away. So by this time, George Oates had been put in jail for embezzlement from the organization as well as tournament rigging. If you're able to find the archives on bassmaster.com, you'll see that George Oates was permanently barred from Bassmaster. So Oates goes to jail in the '76 time frame. Another guy picks up the reins, and they take it, and they ended up getting bought out by an organization called National-Bass-Association, NBA, who had a magazine called National Bassman, which we'll get to in a minute. So there's ABF. Now we've got American Angler. And American Angler was another magazine that was started in about the 74 time frame. So this is November, December of 74, I believe. The interesting thing about this magazine is when it started out, the first 3 or 4 issues, there's more than bass fishing in it. And the magazine was started by American Angler, which also had the American Angler TV series. So the magazine kind of reflected what the television show was. They were fishing saltwater, they were fishing freshwater for trout and bass, crappie, everything that you could imagine. And so that's what the magazine initially was, dealing with, was, writing about everything that someone would see on the TV show. And then John Fox buys American Angler and buys the TV show. And on the TV series prior to him buying it, he was actually the American Angler. He was the guy that they were filming while they were producing the show. And so Fox takes over, and within, year and a half, evidently things weren't going well. He got accused of cheating in tournaments, and he sold out again to National Bass Association, NBA. But again, let's look at some of these covers. Okay, so here's another landscape. This is American Angler landscape. That's a beautiful painting. I'll probably end up, I ain't gonna take the cover off the magazine, but I may put the whole magazine in frame. It's a beautiful cover. And then, to show you that all the big sticks back in the 70s, they weren't just fishing Bassmaster. They were fishing everything. ABF, NBA, American Angler, BCA, Project Sports Incorporated, or PSI. They were fishing all this stuff. And on that cover right there, who do you see? Jimmy Houston. So yeah, Houston was was a big supporter, or you know, a big fisherman on American Angler and all the other series that there were out there. All right, so let's talk about National Bass Association. So National Bass started in 77, and this is their inaugural charter member issue. And February, March 1977, and right there it says charter issue. And of course it's got their shield on there, the National Bass Association. And this organization was owned by a gentleman named Dewey Yop, who was actually involved in American bass fishing. And he took over, you know, started this organization, and again was going to compete directly with Rayscott. Well, he starts the organization in 77. He ends up buying American Bass Fisherman a year later when they went belly up, and then months later he buys American Angler. And National Bass Association essentially was only in business from 1977 to when they folded in mid-1979. So probably one of the shortest lived national organizations that we've ever seen. Here's a December, January 77, 78. Pretty cool cover. Pretty cool Hearst boat on the back. And then here we got September, October of 78. National Bassman now serving the American Bass Fisherman, or ABF. So you go from the last issue, the July-August issue of ABF, where they say nothing about being sold out, to all of a sudden you're not getting your magazine, and that shows up at your door because they've assumed ABF. It kind of leaves you with your head scratching. At least you got a magazine to watch, or to check out, read. Pretty cool Ranger ad on the back of that. And then, like I said, they didn't last too long. So this is the July-August 1979 issue. This is the last issue ever printed in the masthead. You know, masthead of all these other magazines, the ABFs, the National Bass, and American Angler. I mean, you look at the masthead where they list the authors and the owners. I mean, it was just a list of the top anglers and the top writers at the time, and it made me wonder, do these guys really know? Because Al Lindner's name is in a lot of these magazines. Did he really know that his name was in that magazine as either an author or an executive editor or what have you? I have a feeling they were just putting those names in there to make their magazine look better. But anyway, that's the last magazine. There's nothing in it about the magazine or the organization going away. They're talking about, you know, tournaments for next year, the whole 9 yards, and then they just show up and they're gone. So that's about it, guys and gals. I appreciate you wading through that with me. I hope you got something out of it. You found it interesting. If you found it interesting and you'd like to look at some other tournament organizations or magazines other than what we showed tonight, just leave a comment down on the bottom, and we'll try to give you guys what you want. If you like the video, please hit the like button, and if you like the channel, please hit the subscribe button, and tell your friends. We're trying to grow this and have a good time and teach some of the history of the sport that we all love. So tight lines, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Good night.